Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for another episode of Legal Tea. I'm not sure how in the world I'm on episode 76 at this point, but here we are. Time flies, right? And after all, this week's episode is the last one in 2022. What? So next week's episode is going to be our first one in 2023. Let's see how slow it takes for me to start writing 2023. Alrighty, today's topic is a current trend, something going on in the current time that is pertinent to my little estate and elder law world. This week's episode is about how the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie case has intersected with my little estate world. And oh my goodness, it really has. But before we dive in case you have no idea who these people are, let me give you a brief synopsis, kind of background of what happened. According to Wikipedia, back in July 2021, Gabby and her fiancé, and side note, I think at the end of my last episode when I give a little sneak peek, I referred to Brian as Gabby's boyfriend. Well, they were engaged, so forgive me on that slight mistake. So Gabby and her fiancé, Brian, went on a trip across the country. About a month or so into the trip, Gabby went missing. And next thing we know, Brian showed up at his parents' house in Florida, refusing to talk. A week or so goes by, Brian leaves his parents' house, and then he's reported missing. In mid-September, Gabby's remains were located in Wyoming, and according to the autopsy, she was killed by manual strangulation. She was only 22 years old at the time. Then, in late October, Brian's remains were located in a wooded park in Florida, and according to his autopsy, he died by a self-inflicted gunshot. He was only 23 years old at the time. A notebook was found near his remains, and in it, Brian admitted to killing Gabby. Now, many people heard about this story. It was absolutely all over the news, especially when Gabby went missing, but before her remains had been found. And again, when Brian went missing and when his remains were found. But it's even still all over the news. And actually, we're going to be talking about some of the latest happenings going on with this case. But this case even got airtime on Jeopardy. Albeit it turned out to be quite controversial. But on a Jeopardy episode on November 14th, 2022, there was a clue that referenced Brian, quote, ending his days in the park. And neither family, the Gabby Petito family, nor the Brian Laundrie family, were too thrilled about this clue. And I could see why. This whole story, this whole case is just so sad for 1,000 different reasons. So since the discovery of Gabby and Brian in the fall of 2021, things sure have not slowed down. We're sitting here at the end of 2022, over a year later, and things are still actively going on, which is why we're talking about it here under a current events, current trends episode. Because I happened to catch a headline where Gabby's family, through Gabby's estate, is going after Brian's estate, Brian's parents, Brian's family attorney, and even the police department that was involved, the Moab Police Department. The original lawsuit, which was a wrongful death lawsuit, was filed in May, and it was filed against Brian's estate. In a separate civil lawsuit, Gabby's family, through Gabby's estate again, also brought a lawsuit against Brian's parents, claiming that Brian's parents knew Brian killed Gabby. And finally, Gabby's family, through Gabby's estate, brought a lawsuit against the Moab Police Department due to their response to a situation that involved Gabby and Brian. This, situation they're referring to was something that also was plastered all over the news. If you followed this case, you may remember when the news shared body camera footage from when law enforcement stopped Gabby and Brian. That is the situation. So if you don't know, Gabby and Brian were stopped by law enforcement after they were speeding and swerving all over the road. When law enforcement approached the vehicle, they found Gabby crying, as they described, uncontrollably. Further down in the footage, both Gabby and Brian confirmed they had been arguing through the day, including at a grocery store in Moab, Utah. The lawsuit claims that because the law enforcement officers did not, quote, apprehend Brian for the fight, it led to further and escalating domestic violence, leaving her to eventually be strangled to death by Brian, end quote. So Gabby's family, through her estate, are trying to seek $50 million in the lawsuit. These details, including drafts of the court documents, you can locate them, you can read through them in the source links from WFLA, a Tampa-based news station. So far, that lawsuit appears to be very much still pending. I actually couldn't find any resolution, settlement, or anything for it, though somewhat recently we did see a settlement come through on the case against Brian's estate. In mid-November 2022, a Yahoo News article shared that Brian's estate and Gabby's family, through Gabby's estate, settled, and that Brian's estate is ordered to pay Gabby's estate and family $3 million. Though, as I expected, that's what the settlement says, and there's what Brian actually has in his estate, right? So even though that's what the settlement amount was, the $3 million, Brian's assets are reported to be in the, quote, 5 figures, and whatever that means. But that's how they described it in the Yahoo News article. So that means that Gabby's estate will likely not get anywhere close to the $3 million, but the estate will get whatever they can recover from Brian's, quote, 5-figure estate. In that article, Brian's parents' attorney, Stephen Bertolino, shared, quote, hopefully this brings some closure to this one chapter of this tragedy, and I look forward to working with Pat Riley to resolve the litigation pending against Chris and Roberta, end quote. For reference, Pat Riley is Gabby's parents' attorney, and Chris and Roberta are Brian's parents. So Brian's parents' attorney, Stephen, confirmed that the case against Brian's parents is still active. With that means that the case against Brian's estate is settled, but the cases against Brian's parents and the Moab Police Department are not yet settled or done. Those are still actively being worked on as we speak. But there's a party that I'm leaving out here. Brian's parents' attorney, Mr. Bertolino, he is actually, and I'm not sure if you caught me saying that earlier, but I said much earlier in the episode that Gabby's family, through Gabby's estate, is also going after, Brian's estate, Brian's parents, Brian's family attorney, hint, and even the police department. So this is what I want to talk about next. The whole thing against Stephen Bertolino, Brian's parents' attorney, is the newest update in this case. Well, as of the time I'm writing this episode, at least, which is I'm writing this in early December. The newest update, thanks to a Fox News article, is that it was just announced that Gabby's parents are now adding Stephen Bertolino to the civil lawsuit that was originally brought against Brian's parents. What is their reasoning, you ask? Well, as you may recall, the lawsuit against Brian's parents alleged that Brian's parents knew Brian killed Gabby. So they actually added Stephen Bertolino, the attorney, onto this lawsuit, alleging that it was, quote, insensitive, cold-hearted, and outrageous for Stephen Bertolino to express the Laundrie family's, quote, hope that the search for Gabby was successful and that Gabby would be reunited with her family, end quote. So in their argument, they actually allege that Brian's parents and their attorney knew that Gabby was actually deceased when they made those remarks. As of writing this episode, Steve Bertolino has not yet provided a comment, but this also broke just a few days before I sat down to write this episode, so maybe by the time this episode gets released, we'll have a comment from Stephen Bertolino. So yeah, needless to say, there's a lot going on, even estate-wise, following the deaths of Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. like I said at the beginning of the episode, this case and story, it's just tragic all around, right? Gabby's family is grieving. Brian's family is grieving. There's just a lot of emotions going around, even though it's been more than a year. Sometimes I think we can all learn, and it's not earth-shattering news here. Sometimes I think we all need to remember and keep in mind that life is precious and that life can be short, cut short, which is sad, awful, scary. And here, lives were cut shorter unexpectedly. If you're a faithful Legal Tea listener, you know how I talk about quite often how I'm such a firm believer in everyone over the age of 18 having an estate plan. And when I say that, I don't think people take me really seriously. Actually, someone I was just talking to just a couple of hours ago from when I was writing this episode said to me, Jenny, I just don't understand why I need an estate plan if my net worth is in the negatives. And she was saying it jokingly about her negative net worth, but I know she was being serious at the same time. So like I told her, and like I've shared before on here, an estate plan does more than just deal with who gets what when you die. Estate planning is also about putting people in charge of decision making, like healthcare decision making, and who is going to make healthcare decisions for you if something happens. And I'm not just talking about cognitive impairment like dementia. I'm talking about, say, a car accident, or you trip down a flight of stairs, or whatever. You need to have a document appointing XYZ person as your healthcare decision maker. And don't just assume it's just going to naturally be who you want it to be. And the same for financial decision making through a power of attorney document. Again, still not talking about who gets what when you die. I'm talking about, again, if you get in a car accident or fall down that flight of stairs, whatever. Who is going to keep up paying your bills or filing taxes? That, the power of attorney, and the healthcare decision-making document, those are still estate planning documents, generally speaking. And they're just as important as who gets what when you die through a will or a trust. As we wrap this episode up, I think this case is a timely reminder for all of us that life can bring really tough times. It is documented that Brian and Gabby were struggling with their relationship. They are not alone in this either. There are a lot of people out there that are struggling within a relationship, and there are so many resources out there to help. Counseling, therapy, hotlines, leaning on family and friends, etc., etc. Brian and Gabby were in an interesting situation, given that they were traveling when things really hit head on. And that's when the whole thing happened with them getting stopped by law enforcement. There's talk about, should the law enforcement officers done more than what they did? And that's what the Petito family is arguing. But then where's the balance, too? Law enforcement officers are not counselors, and they don't have the ability, time-wise and financial-wise, to thoroughly look into every single domestic dispute. It's just a lot to analyze, right? But nonetheless, to name drop a few resources, there are the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, the Gottman Institute, American Counseling Association, and even several online-based organizations like Talkspace. Okay, let's wrap this episode up for real now. Next week's topic is on estate planning of the rich and famous. And on that episode, we're going to be diving into what happened estate-wise following the way too soon passing. He was only 27 years old when he passed. The way too soon passing of very, very famous musician Jimi Hendrix. So tune on in for that next Tuesday, Legal Tea listeners, to join as I dive into Jimi Hendrix's estate, which is a juicy one. So talk to you then, and stay well.